Hello and welcome to Material Matters with me, Grant Gibson. We've been going for 2 years now, would you believe? But for listeners who might be new to all this, the idea behind the show is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. In the days before the virus, we'd visit our guests in their studios or workshops, but for now we're making do with the internet instead. For this episode, I'm delighted to talk to the artist Stuart Haygarth. Stuart was initially a photographer and illustrator before taking a slightly different path and creating pieces made out of waste that he's assiduously collected. He burst onto the design scene in 2005 at Designersblock with a pair of extraordinary chandeliers. Millennium was made from a series of party poppers he'd collected on the first morning of the year 2000, while Tide, comprised of flotsam and jetsam, picked up over several years from the Kent coastline. Other pieces have used the taillights of cars and spectacle frames. Over the years, he has exhibited around the globe, including in London at the V&A and with gallery Libby Sellers, at the Lighthouse in Glasgow and DesignMiami, as well as a solo show at the Carpenters Workshop Gallery in Paris, to name just a few. As the critic and former director of the Design Museum, Deyan Sudjic, has written, Stuart has a gift for placement and a colour sense that gives the mundane a sumptuous tactile quality. He finds richness in the traces that wind and weather leave on humble materials, and that can give dignity to even the most tawdry of things. Stuart, thanks so much for doing this. Are you there?
I am, yeah. That was a very nice introduction. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Was it all right?
It was great, yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Tell me, where are you at the moment?
I'm actually at home in my bedroom, actually. It's the quietest place at the moment. I've been having some building work done where I live, and the studio is where I live also. So I've been hiring a studio in Hackney Wick for a couple of years while the building work's been going on. So luckily today the builders aren't here, so it's actually quite quiet. But the bedroom is the quietest place at the moment, so that's where I am.
How have you coped over the past year? Have you been able to work?
I found it actually fine. My daughter's grown up now, so there's no kids running around the house.
Grown up being how old?
She's 20, going on 24 this year.
Properly grown up?
Yeah,
right,
properly
okay.
grown up. Well, the first lockdown I actually really enjoyed. I know I shouldn't really say that. It was a very painful period for lots of people who were losing loved ones. I just found it a period of freedom. There were no deadlines to meet and there was no pressure at the time, well, for 3 months. So I managed to, go to my studio most days because I work on my own studio, and I was at that time, and just got on with all these ideas that I've been wanting to do for years and actually start going ahead with these ideas. So it was quite productive in lots of ways for me. And also, at the time, the weather was great, so that made a big difference.
Can you tell us a bit about your studio? I mean, I know you're in your bedroom at the moment, but maybe we can cheat a little and paint a picture of where you work for our listeners.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to buy a sort of, with my partner, a small warehouse in Hackney over 20 years ago, and we live on the first floor, and I've got a studio on the ground floor, and my partner, we just built a new studio on the second floor. So we live and work in the same building, so that's great.
What does your partner do, Stuart?
Melanie's she comes from a photography video background, fine art though. She's actually currently kind of working on her first feature film. So she's going more towards film than photography.
Very good. Sorry, I disturbed you mid-flow, mid-description. So are you a messy worker? Is everything packed away tidily? How does that work in your world?
I think because my work involves so many different, thousands of objects at a time, I've got to be really organised. So I'm one of these people who doesn't feel particularly organised in their head. So I need my surroundings to be completely organised. So my life flows much smoother. Yeah, my studio is full of boxes with labels on and tools that are very well organised. So yeah, very well organised, meticulously organised actually. But I also have quite a large storage facility near Colchester in Essex. A lot of either unsold work or materials get stored. So I try and keep as much open space in the studio as possible to work.
Right. Does that mean you take many trips out to the Essex countryside?
I do cycle around there because it's quite a beautiful area where the storage facility is. But no, if I go collecting, it's normally on the coast. I go there probably once a month just to get materials or take some work there or whatever.
When you say that your work, and here I'm going to quote you, revolves around everyday objects, often collected in large quantities, categorised and presented in a way that they are given a new meaning. It's about the banal and overlooked objects gaining new significance. Can we unpick that a little bit for our listeners?
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But what is it that you do?
I think a lot of my work is a lot to do, I've been thinking about this recently, it's a lot to do with abandonment and things that become redundant in life. So, for example, now I'm working on a new piece which is to do with sort of old carriage clocks, which is, again, it kind of become redundant now. So the piece is all to do with flight and travel. Yeah, it's kind of old time is being lost, as in, the clock faces. It's all digital time now. So these clocks have become redundant. So it's kind of, giving a new life that things have beauty, but they've lost their worth in the current society. So, yeah, it's a lot to do with, things that become redundant that I like to bring back into the spotlight in some way.
I first came across your work at a show called Designersblock, which I mentioned in the intro, and you emerged from the design world. But would you describe yourself as a designer?
I get that question asked quite a lot, and I think
I never ask original questions on this show, Stuart.
I don't feel like a complete pure designer because the work isn't just functional. There's always a narrative to the work, which is always really important to me. And then I don't feel like a true artist because I guess the work is functional. I like to be in that kind of hybrid area where I'm neither.
Fair enough. I mean, your pieces come with a fascinating backstory. To take one of the ones we were talking about earlier, Millennium, made of party poppers. Can you give us the background to that? How did that come about?
My first pieces, the Millennium and the Tide chandelier, were both stemmed from taking the dog for a walk. The Millennium piece, which was on the first day of the Millennium, I went for a walk with the dog on the south bank because we used to live by the river. And there was just this sea of coloured party poppers. It was like a field of flowers. It was amazing. It was kind of a very historic moment that all these poppers had been popped at the same moment in time to celebrate the coming of the year 2000. So I thought they had some historical significance, apart from being sort of beautiful objects. So I just got some bin liners and filled them up with these thousands and thousands of party poppers, and they stayed in my studio for sort of 6 years, I think, until I decided what to do with them.
So what did your partner make of the fact that while everybody else was getting over their hangovers, you were lugging back black bin liners full of detritus?
Well, I was probably getting over my hangover walking the dog. That was... I think I've always collected because prior to doing what I'm doing now, i.e. making these kind of functional design pieces, mainly lighting, I was an illustrator. My illustration work really was collage-based. So I was always finding objects and two-dimensional material to tell a story. So I always had an archive of objects in my studio that I could rely on to help tell a story, to illustrate a book jacket, for example. So I've always collected. Even as a child, I collected stuff.
What did you collect as a child?
It wasn't so much the normal kind of fossils or anything, it was, or insects. It was more kind of debris that I'd found on the street, something that had been squashed in the street and looked interesting, but all sorts. I can't really remember specifically, but I've always hoarded things away.
Do you ever consider why you feel the need to do that?
I don't know, actually. I think I find things that have been thrown away. Not everything's beautiful that's thrown away, but I do find beauty in things that have, like I said, ended their life in a way. I have a story to tell.
Yeah. Because we're all collectors to some extent or another, aren't we? I mean, Freud put that down to having our excrement cleaned away when we were babies, anal retention. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's something to look into.
Well, I just thought I'd mention it. There's a very good piece by the architect, Sam Jacob, who's one of the guys from FAT back in the day, who reckoned it was an individual's effort to somehow write themselves into history as if they were a mini museum.
Right, okay. I know why I collect now, because it's, to make work, but I think also maybe it's getting something for free as well. You find things, it's free, and it's of interest.
That never turned up in Freud's writing, just so you're aware. I mean, when you're picking stuff up, and I suspect you've probably answered this in some ways, but when you're picking stuff up, do you immediately know how you're going to use it, or does that develop over time?
Yeah, it develops over time. I normally, for example, I've done a piece of work based on found broken car wing mirrors from cycling around London. I do a lot of cycling in London, so I just started finding these mirrors that have kind of been run over and they've become really like jewels, all cracked and very beautiful kind of surface on them. I thought that I would put one in my rucksack when I was cycling and then find more and more of them and then start thinking of how I could use them in an interesting way. Or in that case, I made a sort of a huge mirror ball with all these stuck on this kind of sphere. So that's, the ideas come after finding something. I don't get an idea and then find the object.
Right. Because I was going to ask what your process is. I mean, once you've collected all these wing mirrors, do you draw what they're going to become, or do you work with the material three-dimensionally to work out what's going to happen?
Normally I sketch a lot. That's the way I think, really. In my sketchbook, I doodle a lot. And that's a big thought process for me, is sketching ideas and developing ideas through the sketchbook. And then when I reach the point where I'm happy with the sketch, I'll maybe make a model if it's possible. Not all my work is possible to make a model. It's like the tide chandelier, I couldn't make one. But then I'd plan how I would construct the piece. That's always important, the sort of practical side of it, and how best the craft side is also important to me. How it's put together in a beautiful way, in a sharp way. Yeah, but sketching is really important to me, and visualizing.
Yeah. So when you started, Stuart, were you consciously thinking about the environment and the comment these pieces might make about it, or was that a byproduct?
The first piece that I made, Tide, from the collections of plastic on the coast, I did realise that there was an important environmental point to be made by the piece, just because of the amount of plastic that I was finding on the coast at the time. Although to say that the coasts are getting much cleaner over the years. I've been collecting for over 15 years now on the coast, and they're definitely getting cleaner.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing for you?
Well, yeah, it's a good thing for the environment, not a good thing for me, because I have to work a lot harder to find stuff. So yeah, initially, for that piece, for example, the environmental point was important, but as time went on, it wasn't so much the environmental, the recycling issue was just a healthy byproduct of the work. I never saw myself as an environmental designer.
Right. I mean, there is an obsessiveness to the way that you collect. And I was flicking your book from 2016 the other evening.
Strand.
Yeah. And it's a pretty extraordinary project that you did. You walked 500 miles along the south coast, picking up detritus on your route.
Yeah.
I mean, this beachcombing, as you suggest, started in about 2000, I believe. So why did you decide to walk 500 miles around the coastline to pick things up?
It was actually a proposal I made for a commission for the Macmillan Cancer Centre on Huntley Street in the centre of London. And the idea really came, I had been doing a lot of walking on the coast, but the idea of doing this kind of mammoth adventure walk, if you like, was the concept of kind of, if you're diagnosed with cancer, you start this very physical and mental journey. So I wanted to put myself through this kind of physical and mental journey as a kind of reference to that. So yeah, the walk started in Gravesend, where the Thames meets the sea, and walked all the way down to Land's End. I didn't do it in one go. It was done over, I'd go away for a week or 10 days and then come back.
And then when you did those 10 days, practically, how did you do it? Where did you stay and stuff like that? Yeah,
well, I've always had a camper van, so I actually bought a trailer for the camper van when I did that project. So I had the camper van with a trailer, and I'd just drive down to the coast, park up as close to the coast as I could, and then walk for the whole day, do about 20, 25 miles a day, and then either get a taxi back to the camper van or get the bus back. And then the following morning I'd drive to where I finished and then repeat the same thing.
Right. And what did you decide to pick up? Presumably you didn't just pick up everything that you saw.
No, that piece was actually, while I was walking, I was collecting for the tide chandelier as well, but this was the piece that I made for the Cancer Centre was really like I was picking up coloured plastic, because the actual piece is like an explosion of a firework going off. So in the centre, at the core of the piece, it's white, and then it goes to yellow, orange, red, until you get to black plastic on the outside. So it was graded like that. So I was mainly collecting plastic with colour to it. So yeah, no, I don't pick up everything. You have to realise that I have to carry it in a huge rucksack. So,
well, this is it, because the way that you carried it seems quite an intrinsic part of the project. You started with a kind of trolley, I think.
I did.
And discovered that you couldn't work it that way.
Yeah, I had this mad idea of having a wooden trolley on wheels. I thought I could pull it along. But after the first week, the terrain was like, I had to get over fences and go through mud, and it just wasn't practical. So I got to Folkestone and thought, forget this trolley. And I bought a huge army rucksack, which I used. I bought it at an Army and Navy store in Folkestone. And that was a much more efficient way to, just being on feet rather than pulling a trolley.
And was it always your intention to create, you made the piece that you talked about just now, but was it always your intention to create a book from the walk as well?
No, I think I found so many amazing things on that trip. The piece it's a large sort of hanging piece. There's no light in this piece, actually. It's just the light is supposed to come from the centre where it's white and emanate outwards, but there's no actual physical illumination in there. And I just thought it's quite big and it's at a distance and there's thousands of objects. You can't really see any detail of many of them. So I wanted to, because I found some interesting objects, I thought it'd be nice to categorise them and then photograph them very beautifully on a white background on a large format camera. So it was all categorised into things like, well, shoes or babies, dummies, toys, different categories. So it's more of I wanted to record all the items that went into this piece more meticulously.
And you also categorise by colour as well.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, there are essays by Deyan Sudjic, who I quoted in the intro, and Robert McFarlane in there. And you kept a diary
I did.
Of your travels. But again, you don't make any great environmental statements about the project. You're very much leaving that up to the viewer to make their own decision, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I asked Robert McFarlane and Deyan to write essays for the book, because they both sort of brought up the obsession with collecting, but also I think Robert wrote very beautifully about the environmental issue. So I think that comes across in the essays. I wasn't collecting for an environmental purpose, it was for an artwork, so...
No, fair enough. I love the anecdote that on one of your early trips, I don't think this is the Strand one, but one of your beachcombing trips, you found a message in a bottle from an artist in Finland asking for money for a church organ. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I found quite a few messages in bottles, mainly from young kids from primary schools who put them in the sea. But there was one, I actually found it when I was living in Berlin, and I used to have to drive to Holland to collect plastic, which is a long drive.
It's a long drive. So you're living in Germany. Why? I mean, Germany has beaches, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, they do. And Germans being Germans, the beaches are so clean. So I did go to the German beaches first, but it was no good. So I had to head to Den Helder in Holland.
We love a national stereotype on this show, by the way.
That's where I found this bottle with. It was on the Dutch coast, and it was from a priest in Finland or somewhere in Scandinavia, who put a little painting in there, a little bit of canvas, and said, if you find this painting, please donate some money to this fund, and gave an address. I sent them a note saying I'd found it, but they didn't say how you could donate money.
That's a flaw in their business plan, I think.
It was.
I'm intrigued, did you get any more background? Were they throwing loads of bottles out, or was this just a one-off that you happened to pick up?
I don't know how many they put out there, but I don't know how many paintings he would have made, really. I mean, they weren't particularly meticulous or anything, but I think it was more of a gesture that he did a painting. I have found quite a few messages in bottles, but yeah, mainly from children. But that was probably the most interesting.
I was intrigued by your Sharp project, which you worked on between 2003 2006, which is another kind of you photographing objects, but this time of objects that have been confiscated from passengers boarding British Airways flights. What piqued your interest in that? Well,
it was around about the time of 9/11 and that horrendous time. And airport security got much stricter in that period, obviously. And I don't know, when I was ever flying anyway, I was always interested in what items were being taken off people. And I just thought it was an interesting kind of archive of objects to see what is actually confiscated. And there were some bizarre things like furry handcuffs, obviously knitting needles, stuff like that. It's just, I was interested to see what was deemed dangerous on an aeroplane. Obviously, thousands of scissors and knives and stuff, but there was some really bizarre stuff as well. Again, meticulously photographed all these objects, categorised them, photographed them on a white background. And the idea was to do a book, but unfortunately, at the same time, as I was just about to find a publisher, I realised that actually my partner saw a book from a Dutch graduate designer who had just done a book doing exactly the same. So I never followed through with it, unfortunately.
And what happened to all those objects that you collected from BA?
They are still in my storage. I don't know. I haven't got the heart to throw them out yet or do some. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, really.
Well, this could be the opportunity you need to dust off the fluffy pink handcuffs.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we talk a bit about your background, Stuart? Because as we've kind of alluded to, this is your second or possibly even third career, really.
Yeah, third, yeah.
You were born in Lancashire. Your dad was a carpenter. Mm-hmm. Is that where the desire to make things comes from?
I think so, yeah. My dad, he started as a carpenter, but he became just part of the building trade, really, and then actually taught the building trade to apprentices. And yeah, my dad had always made furniture for the house. He built houses for us when I was a kid. So very hands-on, very practical chap. And he always had a woodworking shop at home. I think I've always wanted to sort of emulate all that and make things. And I was always interested in making stuff when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Go-karts and stuff like that.
And what does he make of your pieces, I wonder?
He always says, I've got a lot of patience. That's the main thing he says. Ooh, you must have a lot of patience to do that. Which you do need a lot of patience, I admit.
Well, that's great, because I have watched you assemble one of your pieces made of old spectacle frames that was at the Lighthouse in Glasgow.
That's right.
And, it's quite a process. And watching you assemble it was kind of intriguing, because there was this kind of, I guess, relaxed concentration, I'd put it as, where there's no tension, there's no stress, but you were definitely concentrating extremely hard. How does it feel when you're putting these pieces together?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, the Lighthouse, installing that work. That was quite early on in my new career, so I was probably quite nervous at the time, probably just hiding it. But yeah, I think my work does involve a lot of concentration. You have to focus on, obviously a lot of my work, the objects hang on lines or linked together, and they have to go on the correct hook or whatever. So there is a meticulous process to it all, so I do have to focus, yeah. Luckily now I have assistants who help me do it and take some of the pressure off, but yeah, no, it's very easy to make a mistake doing and assembling a piece, I think, so I do need to focus. You
studied graphic design at Exeter College of Art and Design. So when did you decide you wanted to be a graphic designer?
Good question. I did an arts foundation course in Preston after school, and I just loved everything I did at foundation course. Sculpture, fine art, painting, printmaking, furniture making, and jewellery. I did everything. I loved everything I did, and it was very difficult for me to decide what to do. And I think in the end, I did want to do sculpture really, but I thought, maybe I should go for a more commercial angle and do graphics or something. So that's what I did. I did graphic design at Exeter School of Art and Design. It no longer exists. And it was a graphic design course where you did 3 disciplines. You did typography, illustration, and photography. I didn't enjoy typography so much, so I realised I didn't want to do kind of strict graphic design typography. Illustration, I didn't really feel like I was good enough draftsman. But photography, I really shined to. I hadn't done much photography, but I really, really enjoyed photography. So in the last 2 years of my BA, I specialised in photography, but it was studio photography. And my work really was about building things in the studio and then photographing them. So I just used the camera as a tool to record what I'd built, in a way. So I'd build sets and all sorts of stuff and light them. And
when you say sets, what kind of things were you building?
I think my last project there was a whole series of different rooms, like a dining room, a bedroom. There were room sets with walls and the floor, but perhaps I would paint the floor so that the perspective was flattened out, so there was no perspective. So it looked like it was like a checkered floor. It was just squares. Or if there was a light bulb coming into the room, I would actually paint the glow around the light bulb. So I just kind of I'd incorporated painting into the photography, into the set. I painted the light rather than using light to create an atmosphere. There was a lot of sort of painting and model making and stuff like that.
I'm intrigued also that you talked about light, because obviously subsequently nowadays your work, not exclusively, but often centres around light and chandeliers. What is it about light that you find so appealing?
I think that's where it comes from. I think it's from the photography, because, photography is about light and how light travels through different materials and how it can create an ambience in a room, an atmosphere. I think light is so important in a room. Even when the sun shines in the morning when you wake up, it's such an amazing feeling, light, isn't it? The warm light in the evening coming through the window. What you do learning photography, especially in studio photography, is about light and how different kinds of light, if it's diffuse light or if it's direct light, how it plays on surfaces and stuff like that. So that's where my interest, I think, comes from. And like the tide chandelier, it was all about how the light travels through this translucent and transparent plastic. And the plastic had been, sort of etched by the sand, so it had this kind of etched glass. It is the photography, that's where my interest in light comes from, definitely.
So you're studying photography, you leave Exeter, do you immediately get work?
So I left Exeter and came to London with some college friends. We rented a house in Tooting, and I applied for jobs as a photography assistant. So I worked as a photography assistant to several commercial photographers. Yeah, so I worked as an assistant for maybe 2 or 3 years to sort of learn the ropes, if you like, of how you operate as a commercial photographer. And I was working in the advertising a lot, I worked for a guy who was doing lots of car photography and animals in advertising and all sorts of quite exciting things. So I really learned the ropes of how to light objects really well. And so after 3 years of that, I decided to step on my own, and I did sort of commercial photography for maybe 2-3 years. And then the recession hit, 1991, sorry, the recession, wasn't it?
It's an overlooked recession, but yes, I mean, I came out of university in 94 and with no expectation of getting a job at that point. Things changed quite rapidly. But anyway, so sorry, we're back in 91.
I'd only just set up on my own as a photographer, so work wasn't like flowing in. And then the recession hit and work started to dry up for most people, and managed to make a little bit of money quite quickly on a specific commission for Black Magic chocolates. So I had this money in the bank. I thought, well, I either struggle in London, continue to try and find work, or I go travelling. So I've always wanted to go travelling. So I took a year and a half off and with the money went travelling. So I travelled through Africa overland for 8 months, and then through India, and then to Canada, and then back. So I was away about a year and a half.
And then you came back and your work changed again, right?
Then I came back and tried to get back into photography, but then realised as a commercial photographer, I didn't find it creative enough. I just found that I was being a technician, that you were given a visual by a creative director from an ad agency or from a magazine, and they kind of basically knew what they wanted. I just had to put it onto film. I just wasn't finding it creative enough. I've always liked coming up with ideas. So yeah, it's a bit of a low point in my career. I was a bit lost, and I thought, what am I going to do? And then I thought maybe, I don't know how it came along, but I just decided to reinvent myself as an illustrator because I would have more control creatively. I could still use photography. So yeah, I spent 6 months putting a new portfolio together. My work at the time, well, illustration work, was kind of loosely based on the artist Joseph Cornell, who made these very beautiful sort of box assemblages.
Collages, and yeah.
And I was always a big fan of his work. So my style was kind of loosely based on that. So I'd make these collages and, with three-dimensional elements in them, and then photograph them on, very beautifully with really nice lighting and with a 5:4 plate camera. And so, I did the walking around with my portfolio and showing different people, like publishing houses or...
So it's editorial illustration you were doing in that case?
Editorial, but also a bit of advertising in the end. I did a lot of magazines like Esquire and GQ and Men's Health magazine, but also some ad campaigns. So incorporated this kind of love of objects and finding materials to tell a story with my love of photography and lighting, really. Fruitful career for 15 years, I think. I really enjoyed it. But then after 15 years, I think I needed a change. That's when I was walking the dog in Dungeness and finding all this plastic and thought, maybe I could make something from all this stuff that I'm finding. And it just grew organically, actually, the idea of making lighting. And it was because of photography, and I felt like I had a feel for light.
But also, there must be an innate confidence, Stuart, that you could make all these different things work.
I think I've been very lucky, to be honest. I mean, I have been kind of, with illustration, it took off fairly quickly. I don't know, maybe I just hit the zeitgeist of this kind of recycled element being quite of the moment. But no, I think... I was making the Thai chandelier in my studio when I was still working as an illustrator, and my partner's an artist, so there's lots of people coming through my studio to her studio at the back. As this Thai chandelier was growing in the studio, I was getting a lot of attention, and people saying, this is fantastic, and looks great. And so I suppose that gave me a little bit of confidence. I'd made 3 pieces, the Thai chandelier, the Millennium, and then one called Disposable, which was made from disposable wine glasses. When I made those, a friend of mine says, well, you've got to show them now. I said, what do you mean show them? So that's when I got in touch with Designersblock. So I just needed a showcase, a platform to show them.
Well, I was quite intrigued by why you decided to choose Designersblock, because it seems to me you sent a bit of a message of where you wanted to be, because you could easily have tried Freeze Week, for instance. So I'm interested in why you decided to target the design world.
I think because it was lighting. I think the art world is more scary, as well. It's less approachable than the design world. I don't think I'd have a chance of going to Freeze and showing something. Designersblock, they were really nice guys who run Designersblock, and they were very approachable. And at the time, it was at the old Nichols building, which no longer exists, but it's right at the bottom of
Shoreditch High Street.
Shoreditch High Street, yeah. And it was a beautiful old warehouse, and it was the ideal space to show the work. So it just it all gelled together quite well.
There's a nice quote from you where you talked about the reason that you work is to do with categorization and finding patterns in things and trying to make sense of the world. So I'm just wondering, you were like 15 years in of trying to make sense of the world through your work. Does it make any more sense?
Probably not, no. But by making sense of the world, things that I find, for example, the smashed car mirrors that I find in the street, what comes from that for me is that in this contemporary society, we're all moving too quickly, always in a rush to get from A to B, taking risks, driving too close to other cars, so you clip their wing mirror. It's just a sign of how we live in a contemporary city, I think. That's what interests me with all the objects I use, is the human link to them. That's what's interesting. The link, the characterization, the link to the person, the human link to each object.
Narrative.
The narrative, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was quite intrigued doing a bit of research on you. We've known each other a while. We don't know each other very well, but we've stumbled across each other over the years. And it seems to me, having done a kind of sweep of Google and looked at the various pieces on you, that you seem to have stepped away a little from the design media in recent years. I mean, do you think that's a fair comment? And was that a conscious decision, I wonder?
What do you mean by stepping away, as in?
There was a burst of articles about you about 10, 15 years ago, and there don't seem to be quite as many, but you're still obviously working very successfully. Yeah,
I think it's partly due because I haven't had an exhibition for quite a while. That's maybe one thing. And I think when I first started, I was invited to do lots of sort of group shows and show work, and that doesn't happen. It stopped happening for some reason. It's almost like I had a spotlight for a while, and I was invited to lots of different things, and then the spotlight was turned off. But then I became busy, making commissions for people, or being commissioned to make something for a hospital or whatever, or the Welcome Trust windows. I just become so busy that I've never had a chance to get a new body of work together to have a show or exhibit. And that's what is on top of my list at the moment, is to get an exhibition together of new work.
This dovetails with the kind of final question of our time together, Stuart, which is what the listeners can expect to see from you in the future. Do you have plans? You obviously have been working incredibly hard during the last 12 months by the sound of it.
I'm always working very hard. I'm always busy. But I do feel like I need to have more of a presence in the design arena. I kind of miss it, really. Like you mentioned earlier, I was always kind of showing in different places of group shows. I really enjoyed that. So top of my list is finding the time to finish this new body of work and have a show, which will hopefully be at Carpenters Workshop Gallery. That's the frustrating thing that I find, is I'm so busy making work, I don't have enough time to really focus on new ideas and get those out and shown. So my sketchbooks are brimming with new ideas that I'm getting very frustrated that I can't find the time to make.
Are you allowed to tell us what this new body of work might comprise of?
Mainly lighting, but there are clocks, mirrors, in fact, as well, wall mirrors. But mainly lighting, and also tables.
So just with the clocks, because you mentioned it at the top of the show and it was quite appropriate to finish with it. Where do you find the clocks from?
At the moment, I've just been buying on eBay or Etsy.
Right.
I mean, that's one thing that has changed for me, is I used to scour car boot sales and flea markets, but they don't really exist anymore, not good ones. So eBay and places like that online is where I find most of my stuff now, if it's vintage clocks or vintage glassware or whatever I'm looking for.
Or fireplace. You did fireplace sculpture, right?
Yeah, it was for a show at Somerset House about Stanley Kubrick films. Artists were invited to respond to Stanley Kubrick's film, and I responded to The Shining. The set was burnt down in The Shining, and also fire plays a very important role in lots of Kubrick's films. It's called Pyre. The piece is called Pyre, and it's a group, I think it's 60 of these electric fireplaces, the log effect fireplaces that glow like embers in a fire. They have this kind of red light, which is this kind of aluminium spindle that spins to create this flickering.
Very big in the 70s.
Very big in the 70s. I remember I had one. My parents had one. So it's like this bonfire of these electric fires, which is kind of installed in the corner of a room. So that was, in fact, obviously the heating element isn't on, but even the heat from the bulbs is so strong. On this exhibition, they had to install some air conditioners because it got so warm.
Very good. Well, look, I should leave you to continue scouring eBay and working. We look forward to seeing what you come up with next.
Thank you.
And hopefully when we're all out and about, we'll be able to see it.
Great.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And to discover more about Stuart's work, go to stuarthaygarth.com. As ever, there are images from the interviews as well as little films and other things on my Instagram page, Grant on Design. And you can find all the podcasts that I've done, sign up to my newsletter, and lots of other stuff on grantondesign.com. Finally, and this is really important, if you've enjoyed listening and want to see this podcast flourish, then please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this from. And it'd make me really happy if you went to my Patreon page and made the pledge at patreon.com/material matters. You'll be helping to take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft and design to a whole new audience. Thanks so much for listening, and please stay safe and well.